which would not the redeveloper agreement, it would be at the time of the developer's agreement, which would be post planning board approval. That would be a condition of the planning board approval.
That's it. Any other council members have questions?
Phil, I have a quick question about the roundabout. Do you have a visual that shows present existing lot lines versus what's proposed?
Not on this.
Like, does the roundabout include or cut into where like the Fatty's building is?
Yes. So I will go through and this is one of the reasons, and I've said this before, and I don't want to be repetitive sometimes because some people haven't been here, but this is something that we've known, like we've gotten as far as we can in this town with traffic signals and stripes and signs. We need to do something more significant and like step it up, because like we borrowed a little bit of green time from that one and gave it to that one, and this is like the game we play. We've done it with DOT, we've done it with the county. We sat through a meeting today with DOT having this discussion. So we've optimized our intersections to the greatest extent possible, most of them, and the rest are going to be done this year. But with this one in particular,
the timing of the signals.
the timing of the signals.
Okay.
So this required a more, like a paradigm shift, a more fundamental change. And when we did our study, it was recommended that this would do the roundabout here. We didn't proceed with it because of, okay, how many millions of dollars of land do we need to acquire, a right of way for this? It was a lot. How many millions of dollars to construct it? And we sort of just said, okay, well, we'll do the best we can with the tools that we have, with the space that we have, with the curb-to-curb line that we have. When this project came along, one of the most attractive public improvements here was the ability to do that. Not just in, you know, the cost of asphalt, the cost of concrete, and the signal, or, you know, lack of signals, but you know what I mean, the hard, but also the fact that if they didn't want to put this property in, and even if they didn't want to sell this property, it would have to be taken. And that's like a big deal. And it's like you really have to have a stomach to do, to go and take down several businesses and, you know, buildings and take them from the owners and all that. All that's kind of dedicated here. So the properties that are going to be almost wholly dedicated to right-of-way improvements. Actually, let me see if this kind of does it. These two properties here, a big chunk of the 7-Eleven parcel, and then Spring Place under the plan comes in straight like this. So, you know, there is, like, I guess you could say, a swap happening. So where Spring Place is now is going to be a plaza, and then there's a private property will be a straight through. So all those properties get put into the pool to build new roadways and realign and kind of modernize these intersections.
Okay. But you don't really have like a before and after overlay per se.
Not on this. Not on this. I could get you one.
And then I missed the August 13th meeting. For clarification, ingress and egress for the Spring Hill.
Yeah. So let me say two things about ingress, egress. One is this entire project here is right in, right out. Like that is like music to the traffic engineers' ears. Right in, right out. Who doesn't like that? Everybody gets left turns. And then, so that's an important factor. There's a service alley here next to the existing service alley, or I guess access. You can get to the parking garage, but mostly service access here to a service area in the back. And then Spring Hill will be accessed over here. So right now this road comes down like this. So the idea is that it'll be signalized intersection. Left turns will be possible. Right now it's like you take your life into your hands to make that left turn.
I'm stuck.
Yeah, you get stuck in the middle of the street and just hope for the best.
Can you inch up a little bit so I can swing behind you?
It's that's like the merge by intimidation method. And so that will be just like it is now. So one of the things,
you have a signal right there.
yeah.
Like mid block of Spring Street.
Well, it's not mid-block, there's a signal, but yes.
Okay. And is that going to significantly, decrease the efficiency of the roundabout and also cars coming uphill?
So I'm gonna let Brian answer that.
Yeah, so we looked at that proposed signal as part of our modeling.
Right.
And in terms of putting that traffic signal in and coordinating with the signal along Spring Street, we didn't see additional queuing. They would see up or down Spring Street, and we didn't see queuing into the roundabout. But what we have talked about with the applicant's traffic engineer and is incorporated into the plan is additional signal equipment at that proposed signal that would provide a relief if traffic does back towards the roundabout, not into it, but towards it, that the signal would change. It would sense that the car's there, and it would change, turn green to alleviate any potential queuing that would happen there. So that is incorporated into the plan as well.
And I'll also note that the primary function of that, other than to the nursing home, for the purposes of this site specifically, is to provide egress from the garage. That garage can also be egress through here. If this ever, they had to create more red time there in order to make like a green light tunnel for the roundabout, vehicles could come out here and just go to the roundabout to go back toward the highway, which is the predominant movement at that time of day.
Okay. So during the AM hours, I don't really see an issue. During PM, afternoon, you're gonna have, what, 1,500, 2,000 people leaving work in a very, very, compressed time frame? And leaving from that
Yeah,
point,
let's
right?
let him talk about the peak hour trips.
Yeah, so the peak hour trips really, you're talking about 1,500 and you use the employee count.
Is that an accurate number? I just pulled it out of.
It may be, it may be. But we're looking at just a specific 1 hour time frame.
Yeah.
And that, it's not at that level. It's a lower level. than that.
Microphone, please?
Yeah.
I apologize.
Stop your mic.
Sorry about that. So it would be less than that total number in 1 hour. And what the roundabout does facilitate is to allow essentially two movements to 287, which is the primary movement where people are trying to get to. So they could come out to the proposed signal on Spring Street and then come through the roundabout and head east on Mars Street. Or they could make a right out of their proposed access on Mars Street and U-turn through the roundabout. It's one of the nice things about a roundabout is you can facilitate U-turns fairly easily. You could U-turn through the roundabout and head to east. So we looked at that. We've also talked with the applicant's traffic engineers, and we were concerned about, what is that percentage and what should it be? 100% coming out to Spring Street and the signal, 100% coming out to Mars Street and making a U-turn, 50%. So we did some sensitivity to look at what that percentage realistically might be. We felt comfortable with the numbers that they were presenting, who would make a U-turn and who would come out to the signal. And that was baked into the models, and we weren't seeing any of this queue and pass that you may be concerned about.
Just to follow up on that, what's the projected number of parking spaces in the lot?
Is it like that something?
I thought it was like 900 or something. So when you said 1,500, there's only 500. There's only 900 cars in the whole lot, so.
We're all taking the train.
What?
We're all taking the train.
Oh, yeah, right.
Can we talk to any other questions?
Yeah, I just have a couple of comments. I echo what's been said about
Councilwoman's trying to.
So just thank you for your detail, and I just echo what's been said about the detail and the incorporations that you've made and the analysis and the depth of what you've done. I think what concerns me at this point is hearing more about, I'd just like to hear more about the Morris and Elm intersection.
Sure.
Because that's already a really bad intersection. at rush hour or at peak hours. You know, one might even, I've heard opinions saying that that's already a failed intersection.
Right.
So I'd like to hear a little bit more about how that's getting, I think that was one of the intersections where the delay was going to increase. So I'd like to kind of explore that a little bit more. And then could you talk about the short-term parking provision and a little bit more on where that's addressed here? I didn't see that, and you had mentioned that in your comments, and I was happy to hear that because one of the comments that was made at the hearing was you're not going to spend $5 to park to get a $10 pizza, and that comment just stuck with me. And the other one was the retailers that are already in there. There's quite a number of them, and so it's obvious that they're going to be displaced, but you had mentioned the concept of affordable retail or provisions about that. So if you could just go into a little bit more detail about how that's addressed and what we can look forward to seeing with that, I'd appreciate it.
With regard to the off-site intersection that you raised first, you know, again, that needs to be looked at more by the traffic folks in terms of what the recommended improvements would be at that intersection. We're going to create an obligation for the developer to address that in the redevelopment agreement. The redevelopment agreement will be entered into prior to the developer appearing before the planning board. That's an important step for us to take to protect the town in that regard, because ordinarily, the planning board does not have the power to impose off-site sort of improvements, intersection improvements. But because we're in the redevelopment process, we can create that obligation through the redevelopment agreement. And that will obviously have to be done on a collaborative basis, and it would have to be, you know, most likely there will be proportionality involved in terms of impacts of this project on those intersections. But the idea would be, and the concept would be, to work with the developer to agree on reasonable common sense mitigation measures for those intersections. So it's impossible right now to state exactly what those are going to be.
But that would be addressed in the planning board?
That will be addressed through the redevelopment agreement in the first instance, and then more specifically at the planning board level.
And that you approve the agreement.
And you would have to approve the redevelopment agreement.
Okay, that's the next level.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then your next question was about parking.
Yeah.
So I could read this provision into the record. It's on page 31. Vehicular parking requirements shall conform to the town ordinance. Square footage for parking requirements shall be calculated based on net floor area. Parking for retail shall be publicly accessible at rates comparable to those offered by the Morristown Parking Authority, with a small portion to be determined by the planning board available for free for short term, not more than 30-minute use.
Okay, so what concerns me about the 30 minutes is that, you know, if you go into Panera, you have lunch, you're there more than 30 minutes. So is there any way we could do something like an hour or, you know, a reasonable lunchtime? Because if we do have Panera in there and you have people like me who use that, who like to go there and come across town, you know, I'm either increasing my carbon footprint, driving around looking for a parking spot, or I'm paying to park. Granted, it might be $1 or $2, but it's still an increase in my mind. Is there any way we could enhance that?
It's an increase over nothing, right? It's an increase over nothing if it's $1 or $2, I understand that. A lot of cities, the city of Summit does 15 to 30 minutes free parking on the street. That's like kind of a standard convenience time frame. You know, we'll take the direction of the council on this. You know, personally, I would encourage you to consider. There's a significant body of urban planning thought. You know, the high cost of free parking. And that you value what you pay for, and that this parking lot is free. And this parking lot, like, I'm not here to provide a study of how this property is used right now, but anecdotally, this parking lot is abused. And it's used by transit, and it's used by other uses.
So, small portion, can you give us an idea of what? Do we need to be
we
more
said,
definitive here?
what's that?
or would it behoove us to be more definitive here in this plan, or would that come later in the agreement, or is it?
I'm happy to defer to the agreement if that's makes you comfortable. I think, like, honestly, we've done so much work prior to having a zoning ordinance on this property. That's what the redevelopment plan ultimately is zoning
Well, I
ordinance.
think you have to do that in the ordinance, because again, once the redevelopment project is completed, the redevelopment agreement goes away. And this is a provision that you're gonna want to survive with the redevelopment process. So it really should be addressed in the ordinance and the plan. Once they get their certificate of completion, the redevelopment agreement goes away. So the issues that are addressed in the redevelopment agreement kind of get us through the implementation of the project, unless we find another mechanism for them to survive. But this is the type of provision that I think really should be addressed in the plan by ordinance.
Yeah, I guess the thing that concerns me is if I've heard that Panera is possibly gonna stay as an anchor tenant, or is there, so, you know, we can assume that a majority of patrons are gonna come from that complex, but not really, you know, people might, so the parking provision really, I think, matters. I don't know what the answer is, but the other thing that I know I talked to you about was like the health market there. You know, if you're shopping there, parking's important, because you are gonna spend maybe 30, 40 minutes, but also accessibility. Like, how are you gonna get there from the garage into that retailer?
Yeah,
Is it
and
like-
these are pretty detailed,
Is
like
that
design
planning?
questions.
Okay,
Yeah, that,
okay.
absolutely. But I will say, I mean, typically, you'll have, you know, validation with for a retail customer. Look, I'll take the direction of the board if it's 30 minutes or 60 minutes. You know, you guys let me know. I think that, you know, in some respects, somebody might argue it could cannibalize. Parking authority doesn't give free parking away. The town's parking authority with
Phil,
food.
if I may make a suggestion, because you kind of have to have this resolved now if you want to introduce it. It is also something that can be changed. One option for you to consider is to accept the recommendation of Phil tonight for purposes of the plan. And once, you know, the project is built and you're implemented, you can look at it and you can change it anytime you want, because it becomes a change that you can make by ordinance anytime you want. So it's not something that is a final forever decision. It's something that would be in the plan based upon the recommendation of the planner for now. And if it's, you know, not working out exactly the way you want, once the project is implemented, you can always change it.
So we can define it later?
No, you have to define it now,
Right.
but what you do now is not forever. You can always change it later, because it's an ordinance, you can address the change later once the project is implemented. I would suggest you may want to consider taking the recommendation of your planner now, see how it works. And if you don't like the way it works, you can change it at a later date.
That just sounds contradictory.
I would suggest that there's no free parking within you know, half a mile of the train station. Now, you know, if you want to park on the street, you're paying, they're feeding meters. So revision of 30 minutes of free parking so you can pick up a pizza or pick up something quick to go for lunch, I think is a fantastic accommodation. You know, parking is not free. It costs money to other people to provide, so it's subsidized by the developer. So if he's provided free parking, you know, he's going to want to be compensated. We could say 2 hours, and then we could give him a pilot for whatever the value of that free parking is. Does that do anything for the town? Not really.
Well, I just think from the public interest standpoint right now, if you're shopping local and you're buying local and you're eating local and you're parking there, the benefit is that you don't have to drag around for 10 minutes out of your lunch hour to look for a parking spot. You might go to Florham Park or go elsewhere, you know, to shop. So I'm pleased that that's in there, thank you. You listened to what we said and you definitely incorporated. I'm just questioning the time frame because it's you know, but then again, we talked about having 5-minute free in front of the post office. And we don't really enforce that, and that's great, because if people have to go mail a letter, so 30 minutes is, I think, very accommodating. It just would be interesting to know, like, what the cost is gonna be. Is it gonna be comparable to what we're paying in the other garages?
That's what the language is, that it should be consistent. For the retail, it should be consistent with the parking authority's rates.
Okay,
Councilman Anacone, do you know how much it costs per hour, or any of those?
Well, the meters are basically $1 an hour cost. I think we
Right.
put the language in there. The other thing I was going to point out is that the parking authority is somewhat subsidized. This is private property. But it also becomes a point of negotiation with the landlord with his tenants. And it may be, Panera Bread may come in and say, listen, for my type of business, I need this type of parking. You know, so, you know, there is other private flexibility in, because if he needs to build a business, and if that's what he needs for that location, because it's limited parking, he's gonna have to build that into his leases.
And they'll do validation.
so would be the validation program like that we have at DeHart?
Yes.
So
Century 21.
Century
Century
21
21 has
and
that, or, you know, a lot of private.
DeHart, if you're there for 10 minutes or something, you don't pay,
Yeah.
right? Okay. So did you answer the question about affordable retail? Did I miss it?
Yes, so,
Okay.
the retail, is basically, several concepts in there, everything
Where?
from,
5, 6.
and this was actually, changes that were made, so if you have this document, 5.6, page 28, it's given to you separately, by Margot.
That's it.
Yeah, I'm just gonna read it into the record for you. In order to advance the planned objective of creating job opportunities and spaces for local businesses to thrive, the redevelopment agreement between the town and the redeveloper shall identify physical and/or operational measures to encourage the development of small-scale businesses. Measures may include, but are not limited to, a business incubation program, the establishment of small subsidized retail spaces, mentorship programs, or similar interventions. So,
What page was that?
this is on that page 28, but it was given to you as a separate page, as a list page.
And this was what we
Oh, is that
discussed,
team?
Yes.
earlier today, so I thank you,
Yes.
you know,
underneath what
and
you're
team
looking at.
for, incorporating that piece, because I know during a lot of the sessions that we had, you know, the, smaller retail merchants were, you know, big concerns for not only, council members, but for, you know, our constituents as well, so it's nice to see this added and
Yes.
forward lots of.
And this is really future looking, and it gives the council and the developer the opportunity to work together, to think about what a program like this might look like. It's not gonna, there's no one size fits all. This is about Morristown, and we need to really talk to some of these businesses and understand what their needs are and like where they could use the assistance. What this isn't is a lot of these discussions that we've had previously about the existing businesses and things like that. Those conversations are ongoing. A lot of those conversations are sort of waiting for, as are those businesses, waiting for some clarity in the outcome of this ordinance process, quite frankly, because some of them have found leases, don't want to sign it yet because they don't know. Some of them, you know, so there's some of that going on with those businesses right now, but we've been checking in literally once a week with the developer and get reports about those conversations to make sure that those tenants are being treated fairly, they're being treated transparently, and they're being supported through this transition.
2 follow-up questions to Allison. The meter parking on the south side of Morris is not going away. The meter parking on the south side of Morris is not going away, but some of the meter parking on the west side of Morris between Dumont and Spring might go.
Between Dumont and Spring.
Dumont and Spring, that's a good parking spot.
Yeah,
Retail shop.
So that goes to some of the things that John and Allison were kind of going back on a minute ago about there's going to be a few different ways to skin the cat when it comes to parking relocation, parking removal, where do we shift lanes, where do we shift center lines, to make room for different turning movements or dedicated turn lanes. I don't think that we have enough engineering at this point to know that kind of finality. What we've talked about in this plan is that any removal of parking, any relocation, removal of parking has to be authorized essentially through the redevelopment agreement. And so I understand that it's like the step-by-step process, but we really did need to kind of come to a logical point, and then get some clarity, or we're just kind of doing this analysis.
And you will have some more clarity on that issue. Remember that, as indicated before they go back to the planning board for site plan, they gotta come back here for review. And at that time, there will be more specificity with regard to what the game plan is for the off-track improvements on those two intersections.
And the second question is, it's actually going back to the parking garage. In the rear of the parking garage that faces our nursing home back there. The language that you actually included in the revised agreement with reference to the facade.
Yeah, so what we did was we included, when we asked for like, I'll call it like a diagnostic rendering, just to kind of see what will this look like. Not a rendering to show how beautiful something is, but just a rendering to kind of see how something will look from a certain angle. The rendering that we saw from Spring Hill, you saw a building kind of through the trees, and that was it. So it's like not a very satisfying rendering for people. But what it suggested to me is if the trees weren't there, we'd have a problem. We'd have a problem in terms of visual impact. So the first thing was to protect the trees. And we included language based on our conversations that the town arborist, as part of the site plan, prior to site plan review, shall come up with a tree protection plan for those, and that the planning board shall impose reasonable conditions in case there's any issues with survivability during the construction period, to replace, supplement any of that landscape screening, that would be ever damaged during that process. So that's one part, is to make sure that that vegetative buffer is protected and or supplemented with 365-day vegetation. The other was to make sure, and we've always included a requirement that any parts of the garage facade here, like there's little pieces that peek out here that are not buffered by the buildings, that are not faced by the buildings, shall be designed, shall have additional architectural requirements. Anything from artwork, obviously not appropriate toward the nursing home, but or to enhance architectural features, green walls, things of that nature. So we went back and said to that language, this shall include the back, but not be limited to, but just to make it very clear that it was your intention to make sure that that back wall is treated respectfully, is treated in a interesting or at least compatible, harmonious way back there.
The difference is the difference between the Bank Street garage and the Bank Street garage and the Dalton garage, the appearance that you want it to.
Yeah, we don't want it to be utilitarian, we want it to fit in. And there's garages today those were built some time ago, at least the Bank was.
One other point you might want to review is signage, and the language in the agreement on signage.
Sure.
Because again, some concerns, some of the comments I heard from the public was, skyscraper from Morristown, you want it to be somewhat
Yeah.
skyscraper.
You don't want the skyline when you're driving
Skyline,
out.
we have a skyline.
Yeah. Only right the ends against that at the moment. So some of the things that we did was we eliminated, we basically kicked everything to the zoning ordinance for our underlying zoning ordinance. So it would be permitted under the ordinance, it would be permitted here. We took a couple options away, that anything above the first floor shall not be internally illuminated, meaning no channel lit letters, nothing that if you're driving in, you're gonna see this sign. They could be backlit, what they call halo lit letters, like you'll see, some retailers would use. The signs are relatively small compared to the overall building size. I think that's a good thing. I think it's kind of classier than having, these, big signs on the sides of buildings. one of the complex things about signage for the east building that we recognized in the plan is that it has a facade here, a facade here, a facade here, a facade here, a facade here. So
Morristown.